You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation-based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Welcome to Stimulus Tech Talk. I am Sherry Lipp, Marketing Manager here at Stimulus Technologies, and I am here with our CEO, Nathan Whittacre. And today we are going to be talking about a very popular topic, the dark web. And good afternoon, Nathan.
Good afternoon, Sherry. Kind of a nefarious topic, not a popular topic, but we talk about it a lot, surely.
That's true. Well, I think everybody's heard the term, but I don't know that everybody really knows what it is. So maybe we can get started by kind of talking about what do we mean when we say the dark web?
Yeah, it's a common term out there. I was watching a TV show the other day, and it was an older show. It's almost 10 years old, and one of the episodes had a discussion about the dark web on it. So it's definitely been referenced in pop culture. We talk about it in IT circles quite a bit, and I think a lot of people don't quite know what we mean when we say the dark web. And really what it is it's a portion of the internet, which is considered a large portion of the internet, that is used to trade and nefarious stuff. So that could be drugs, it could be terrorists, it could be money laundering, it could be whatever it may be. It's a portion of the web that's used to communicate bad information. Bad actors live there and communicate this information back and forth. So and it's where it's bought and sold. And a big portion of the dark web, you might have heard of Silk Road, which was around a long time ago and shut down by the FBI about 10 years ago. But that was a huge site or location that wasn't accessible, on Google searches, but people got on there and bought and sold drugs or people, or it just was a bad place. And the FBI finally was able to shut that down. But there's so much other portions of the dark web that have proliferated that aren't part of Silk Road and are still around today.
So is the web, what kind of regulations are there? I mean, it's worldwide, so obviously there's a lot of different countries involved. Is that why the dark web exists? Because we can't regulate everything?
Yeah, so these sites live in the internet, which is connected all over the world, and there's tons of different jurisdictions, and some of them have more lax laws and or not able to enforce the laws. And so the United States government has a lot of regulations around this, but it takes a lot of international effort to crack down on these sites, and a lot of them live in countries that actually actively support hacking and other activities associated with the dark web. So you're looking at bad actor countries like North Korea or Russia or even China that support these activities in cyber attacks against the United States or other allies. So and it's just impossible unless we disconnected from each other from a worldwide standpoint. It would be impossible to disconnect the ability to communicate this across the world. So there's a lot of regulations from a U.S. standpoint, but they don't reach outside, and we have to interconnect with the rest of the world. And other countries have, firewalls set up that they don't allow, access to U.S. sites, but we allow pretty much everything to come through into the U.S. And so that opens us up, because we have much more freedom in the U.S. than some of these other countries. It opens us up to, many more attacks and the information to be able to be transmitted across easily. And a lot of it's encrypted, so you can't the authorities can't access this directly because it is protected by levels of encryptions, and it's obscure, so you can't just directly see these sites. You can't just do a Google search and say, show me where the bad stuff is, and it come up. It's protected, and you have to be in on these networks.
So you're saying the dark web is not something that somebody can just log into, which I think is when I was searching about this a little bit, that seems to be a common perception that it's like
Yeah.
a site you can go to and log in. And
No, it's not like, you switch your browser to the dark web browser. There's not dark web Chrome or, or Safari. You have to know about this stuff. And a lot of it's because of encryption technology like VPNs. You have to be connected and know how to access it to be able to engage in it. So it's not something that you can just do a Google search and find where these sites are. You have to have prior knowledge, and a lot of them are invited. You have to be invited into. So it's not something that's just easily accessible by anybody. In the movies they make it seem so easy. It's like, oh yeah, just go to this website and then you have access to it. It's not like that.
yeah, I think movies can just kind of slap the name dark web in there, and that's kind of it. There's another term kind of similar, deep web, but it's my understanding that it's not the same thing as the dark web.
Yeah, there's a definite difference. So it's often described, the internet is described as an iceberg. We have the part of the iceberg that's above the sea, and that's what's accessible to everybody. Our stimulustech.com website and these public websites that are out there are searchable by search engines, and you can access that information without any special authentication. But there's two portions of the web that's below the surface. The first one we talked about, which is the dark web, that you have to have specific invitation and access to, where this nefarious work goes on. But the other portion is the deep web, which the dark web is a subset of. But the deep web is anything that's protected by maybe username and password, or you've had to pay for the content. So think about when you log into your banking website. You have to have a username and password and hopefully some type of two-factor authentication to get access to your banking data. You don't want Google searching and publishing your bank account. If you search up, Sherry Lip, you don't want it suddenly show your bank account information, your social security records, your tax returns, all this. But you, Sherry, with the right credentials, can get access to all that data. Or if you have a subscription to, let's say, the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, that they have some private articles that you have to have a login and password to get access to, that's all part of the deep web. So it's basically obscured without direct access. And that's the majority of the web. You think about all this content you have to pay for, like Netflix or Disney Plus or Hulu. That's also protected by a paid to play feature or a paywall. And that's the majority of the content on the internet now, is behind some type of protection that doesn't allow the general public to access it without a username and password beforehand.
Okay. So getting to, we always get warnings about, our information, our personal information getting on the dark web. How does it get there?
So generally it's websites get hacked, or companies get hacked. A lot of the information that's out there on the dark web is because, a hacker group went into a company like LinkedIn or Target or one of these large companies that have information on a lot of different people. And then they publish that information that they're able to get and sell it to other people. And so generally it's hacking into these large companies and then selling those lists out on the dark web. So I just, personally, I take the assumption that my information is out there on the dark web to be bought and sold, because there's been so many websites and so many organizations that have been compromised that, this idea of privacy anymore is completely out the window. There's just, from usernames and passwords to your birthday, social security number, home addresses. I mean, all that information is most likely available on the dark web. And as much as you try to protect it, even our federal government's been hacked and that information's gotten out there. So it's there. it's come over the years as this information's been stolen.
So when it comes to smaller, medium businesses, what kinds of things should they be? What kind of information might get out there from them?
So small businesses need to be careful and understanding protecting themselves, especially against the personal identifiable information such as their employees' records, if they're in the healthcare industry, healthcare records, any confidential information that they're collecting on their clients or employees, especially if they're in the finance field. Um, so, a lot of these hacks that happen in businesses, they're not just after the company, they're after the information that they have. So they might, confidentially get in. If they can get into your servers, they'll try to exfiltrate that data out and then use it to be sold on the dark web. So, and then not cause any damage to your organization directly, but certainly damage your company by getting that information out of your company. So, the PII, or personal identifiable information, or PHII, which is the healthcare records, is really the most important stuff that companies protect. And we all have it. I mean, if you have an employee, if you've ever processed a credit card, all that information is somewhere stored on your systems or your vendor systems, and you're responsible to protect it.
How can businesses check to see what information has gotten out there, or can they?
So there is a way to look for the basic stuff, like if your username and password or your email addresses have been part of these large hacks that are done out there. And we help companies do that check when we onboard them or when we do an analysis for them. So we have some software we have that has access to these known stolen lists. So that's something that we recommend monitoring. From a personal standpoint too, I recommend setting up credit monitoring to see, if any of your information is, if your credit report's being pulled, or if people are registering new, credit against your account, things like that. So, I think it's important personally to set up monitoring, and then as a company to set up a monitoring of your usernames and passwords and email accounts. And just understand the hygiene of your employees on the dark web, because unfortunately what happens is a lot of the employees are using the same usernames and passwords across multiple sites. And so if they use the same password that's stolen on, let's say, a news website, and then suddenly that's the password they use for your company's bank account information, that's how they can get in and get access to more sensitive data. So practicing good hygiene and then monitoring what usernames and passwords have been stolen in the past, and make sure your employees aren't using those again.
And what steps do companies take if they find out those kinds of passwords are out there?
Enforcing their employees of using different passwords, like setting up a password manager for their employees. There's a lot of different ones out there, but there are, we recommend using a different password for every website you go to, and password managers are really the only way to do that. And so, having a company-wide password management system is a good way of having that dental hygiene, and then monitoring if the employee's data is stolen periodically. And then training of the employees of that type of good digital hygiene.
What steps? What do you think are the best steps, in addition to the monitoring, that businesses can use to prevent these kinds of leakage of personal data?
Well, it's hard. I don't think you can ever 100% protect against it. Any company that says that you can do X, Y, and Z and be 100% protected, it's not possible. The hackers just only have to be right once, and they're constantly attacking us all the time. So there are things you can do to put up enough walls that the hacker's going to go to another company. And I mentioned password managers, having good defense internally, the multi-layer defense, and we talk about in our security package having security monitoring 24/7, having a good antivirus, next generation antivirus system, AI protection of your email accounts. There's so many things that businesses should be doing today to protect against this, because the arsenal that hackers are bringing after even small businesses is pretty immense. And then the last line of defense is that employee training that we just talked about, so that they're aware of what's going on and can better protect themselves against it.
Yeah, I think that, we can't say more about employee training. We mention it pretty much in every topic we discuss, because it is probably one of the most important lines of defense. And we did do an entire episode on employee risk. So that it definitely is one of the most important things.
Yeah, certainly. Employees are the company's last line of defense, but also, their worst enemy. To say, one employee can make a mistake that can cost a company a lot of time and money. So, one wrongly clicked link, or not clicking on the wrong email or downloading the wrong software can cause a significant amount of damage. So, and we're leaving it to the employees to not do that. So giving them the tools necessary as much as possible, and then making sure that they're doing that kind of stuff by having that monitoring on their systems. Monitoring as in, making sure those emails that are coming through and the information that's sent back and forth is fully legitimate. And the software is just having to get better and better each day.
And to kind of wrap this up on when we talk about monitoring, what do we do at Stimulus, or a company that does monitoring? What does that mean or entail?
So a lot of it has to be automated, because there's so much data that comes in and out of systems. So we do a multi-pronged approach. We have software that's monitoring and managing the email, protecting against links that are clicked. They're all checked to make sure they're legitimate websites and you're not clicking on a website that's nefarious. We do on the desktops multiple different pieces of software, like DNS filtering, which I believe we've talked about, to make sure that you're going only to legitimate websites. Having next generation antivirus on the desktops that's linked with a 24/7 security operations center that's looking for any alerts or issues. Zero trust, where we're only allowing applications that are supposed to be running on the computer to run on the computer. And a lot of this is automated and then backed by security and IT professionals when these alarms get lit up, and that we can remediate things as they come in. So it's not something that you can just check on once a week or once a month. It's a constant vigilance, because, like I said, we have to be right 100% of the time, and hackers only have to be right once. And that's why we have to employ so many tools to protect our clients.
All right. Well, that is great information. Always important to keep our data secure. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you, Sherry, as always. And, the dark web is a scary place, and you don't want to end up on there. But I think just kind of wrapping up at the end from a personal aspect too, is just, just understand that privacy is something that doesn't really exist anymore. So, just have to be monitoring it and vigilant about what happens out there. So it's a scary world we live in, but you can live normally as long as you have the right protections in place.
All right. Well, thank you. And thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Have a great day.